Bob Wankel, Red October Philly, and crossing broad, Phillies in the final week, a week from tonight, the Home Run Derby. And probably an unlikely competitor is Alec Boehm in the Home Run Derby. Phil's getting ready for the Dodgers tomorrow night. They lose 2 out of 3 of the Braves there. It's tough to really, anytime you lose games when you're not at full strength, it's hard to really say, I could take anything from that. But it seems that this is a good time as Eddie to take a little break after this week. The 4th of July comes, everybody gets knocked out of their routines. I think the Phillies maybe need to get knocked out of their routine for a little bit here.
Yeah, it was a rough weekend overall, especially a tough finish for them to score 1 run across 2 games and be so bad with runners in scoring position both Saturday and Sunday. You had an opportunity to create further distance between themselves and the Braves, and they failed to do it. Now, if you step back and take a look at the big picture, I would say that 5-4 without Kyle Schwarber and Bryce Harper. We talked when this first happened, that first Friday, the day after this all happened. So you got to survive. You got to stay afloat, tread water. They did that. 3-3, I think, between a 6-game road trip in Chicago and Atlanta is a totally acceptable result. But at some point, those absences are going to catch up with you. And they definitely did the final 2 days of that trip. So I know that people are probably a little bit disappointed right now, but I guess I would counter and say, like, when you're missing 3 of your 5 best hitters, at some point it's going to get you.
Yeah, no, you can only go so long without Realmuto and Schwarber and Harper and expect good results. I mean, especially when you're starting to play Atlanta. Now you got the Dodgers coming up here. I mean, you can only go so far without that level of firepower before you start looking at the 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 spots in your order and wondering, where am I going to get any offense from this crew? And that brings us to, do they have to start looking at that back end of the lineup and making a move sooner or later? Or do they say, you know what, we're getting Schwarber, we're getting Harper, we'll get Realmuto back. We'll wait until the last possible minute.
I don't think they're going to do anything earlier than they otherwise would. I think they're going to certainly address the outfield. They have to. We've talked, every time we talk, at some point, the outfield and the offensive deficiencies come up. They're going to have to address it, but I don't know that it gets done any quicker. And we talk about it all the time. These things take time to materialize. We don't know how many teams really want to sell. The way that it looks on July 8th might look a lot different on July 30th. So there's just a lot of moving parts, but you focus on the back end of the lineup. And I would counter and say that yesterday, especially, the top 5 hitters in the lineup were 1 for 17. And that is as a direct reflection of the fact that Bryce Harper, Kyle Schwarber, and JT Realmuto, all of which hit in those top 5 spots, weren't there. Like, it's going to happen. So I think what this does is it puts a little bit more of a spotlight on the fringe pieces, on the depth pieces, and certainly they need to improve. Whit Merrifield has showed, I guess, relatively speaking, relative to April and May and June, some signs of life here. But I think even still, with the Pache Rojas combination is not enough. Like, I'm going to be honest with you, Mike. I think the Phillies are really good. They're my pick to win the National League. And I don't think that there's a lot of like homerism in that. I think they're the best team in the National League, but it's with a caveat. And it's that they go out and they make an outfield move. And if they don't, I don't think this team wins the World Series. I don't think that you can win the World Series with a platoon left fielder in Brandon Marsh, who's a total 0 against left-handed pitching. And then whatever combination of Christian Pache, Whit Merrifield with him in left field, and then pair that up with Johan Rojas. It just isn't good enough. And people want to talk about Johan Rojas hitting 230. Like, cool. What did he have the other night? A swinging bunt, and then he beat out a 7-hopper to first base. Like, come on, man. Like, if you're watching the game, be honest with yourself.
No question. They certainly need to, because all your points are valid. Rojas, if he's the 9-hole hitter and he's the only guy that's a 0 in your lineup, okay. The problem is you have the 8-hole hitters a 0. You have too many outs in front of him, which means he can't be an out. So, of the names that have been out there, Lewis Robert, Jazz Chisholm, Cody Bellinger's back in the mix, although he is also a left-handed bat. Brent Rooker's name has emerged as a right-handed, kind of a DH type of guy. Are any of these guys, though, the guy that Bob Wankel says, if they land him, then I'm excited?
Robert is probably the guy, and I know everyone is talking about him. that's probably the one. Like if you get the news flash, you get the alert, and you see that one, you go, okay, and it's not that he's like a perfect player, but there's a lot of upside there, and I do think maybe bringing him into a situation where winning matters, and maybe he has you get his full attention, I think could be helpful. Bellinger's interesting. He's actually been better against left-handed pitching this season than he has been right-handed, so that alleviates some of that concern. But that comes with a pretty significant contractual obligation. You have him. He has a player opt-out built in each of the next 2 years. That contract in its entirety is a 3-year deal worth $90 million. So I don't know if you really want to get involved with that or not. One of the other guys that we were kicking around, Anthony Sanfilippo and I on our podcast here earlier today, looking at the Rangers sort of falling out of contention. And Adolis Garcia is not having a great year, but he does have 16 homers. He was big time for them in the playoffs last year. There's some team control there beyond this season, and he's not overly expensive. Like a guy like that could be interesting too. But they've got to they have to do something. And is that Robert? I don't know, but they're going to have to get a player of consequence. This can't be like just a platoon ad. I think they have to do better than that.
Which Robert, okay, so then you get into, let's say Robert's the guy, right? Are we at that point where you're like, you can't give up certain guys in your system or any of the guys in your system at that level where you would say, you know what, I'm not paying that price to go get Lewis Robert or Jazz Chisholm or Cody Bellinger?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Talking about Jazz Chisholm, Ruben Amaro said it on air, I believe. It was either on the radio or during a telecast where he basically started to talk about Jazz Chisholm and said, it's not going to happen. Like, there's just no way that player happens for this team, that he's not a fit. And I don't know, I don't want to speak for Ruben, but he basically said it's just not a fit. And I assume that has to do with some type of clubhouse dynamic. So I guess based on that, I don't know if Ruben just woke up one day and thought that to himself or if he was told that or what, but I guess I too would be surprised. I've actually heard from other people myself that doesn't seem like a natural fit for this team. So, look, I don't know. When you talk about what you're willing to give up, let me give you this one. Let me give you a little hypothetical here. I'd love to know your take on this. If a team says to you right now, look, we have the parameters in place for a deal for Lewis Robert, and they say we need an outfield piece. We need an outfield piece to finish this off. We want Justin Crawford. And you say, oh, I don't know about that. And they say, okay, what about Brandon Marsh? Would you think about that?
Marsh is such a tough one because while I acknowledge and agree with what you say, he's a 0 against left-handed pitching. And these people who say you can't hit lefties if you don't get the opportunity, I think they know what the answer to the opportunity is because they've seen enough of a sample size.
He struck out 25 times in 47 at-bats against left-handed pitching this season.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the sample size is, we don't even want to give you any more because we've seen enough. Crawford is into, like, Miller is the one that you're like, do I give up Miller? Crawford, I may be more inclined, although that doesn't even seem to make as much sense because you need help in the outfield, and age-wise, Crawford would be the guy. I don't think you can give up Marsh, though. I really don't. I think.
And do you think that because he's just so good against right-handed pitching, or is it the bigger picture of he's an integral part of the clubhouse? I agree with this. I think that might hurt, but
I think it's more that he's a bigger part of the clubhouse than he is against right-handed pitching.
Yeah. Well, I would just counter and say, and it's something to think about because people are listening to this right now probably going, what are you kidding me? You can't trade Brandon Marsh. He's the man. And I would just say that if you did a straight up deal right now and forget the feelings and the clubhouse dynamics and chemistry, if you brought in Lewis Robert here in exchange for Brandon Marsh, you would be better. Your team would be better.
Well, I guess the person could counter and say Lewis Robert's hitting 220.
Sure. Yeah. And I would just say that, at least you can play him against both left-handed and right-handed pitching, and that's the thing. Like, the reason why I say this isn't to say that I think they should trade Brandon Marsh, because I don't. I actually think that they're in a situation where they have to add, and they probably are going to have to mortgage the future to do it. Like, this is one where it's going to have to hurt a little bit down the line for the now. And I don't think you can subtract such a big part of the equation and then get that addition on top of it and get where you want to go. I think you need to add.
The Marsh thing is tough. So let's say they don't trade Marsh and they trade prospects and they get a guy like, Rooker, who's a right-handed bat, but not a good defensive player. Does Marsh and Rojas now become the platoon? And you get a guy like Rooker playing every day? Do they want him to platoon in center to help Rojas or in left field?
Right. But the greater point of the conversation is everyone wants them to go out and add an impact bat. Of course they do. Who
Yep.
wouldn't want that? But you're going to have to make a difficult decision. You know, when you talk about the Phillies infield situation, you have to look ahead at what the reality is. You know, you have Alec Boehm, who's an all-star this season. You think that Bryson Stott is the future at second base, despite his struggles, right? But then you have go into the prospects. Starlin Caba, top 5 prospect in the Phillies farm system. He's a top 100 prospect. Aiden Miller plays third and short. Don't quite know where he's going to stick yet, but again, he's the number 2 prospect in the Phillies system. Some evaluators have him as the top prospect. You have an infield logjam. Trey Turner's not going anywhere. Bryce Harper's not going anywhere. So you have a little bit of a surplus there in your infield. But again, it's like, would you rather trade Aiden Miller, who everybody seems to think is going to be the next stud infielder? Or would you rather, like, if a team called and said, well, Bryson Stott's young and he's controllable, people would go, like, these are the conversations that happen, though.
Right.
Like, there are teams that are going to call on these players and they're going to talk about Brandon Marsh and they're going to talk about Bryson Stott.
The Stott thing's interesting because he's struggling right now. And I do think, I'll ask you, is the left-handed lineup problem, is that something they look at? Do they look at themselves and say, we're too left-handed? You know, with Marsh and Stott and Harper and Schwarber, we're so left-handed.
I mean, honestly, Schwarber's been able to handle left-handed pitching this year, and I don't think that that is so
it's
problematic.
Though, Bob, to be able to handle left-handed pitching in May against the Royals.
Sure.
You're in a playoff series, and you got a lefty coming out of that bullpen, and you've got Schwarber and Stott and Marsh and Harper. You don't want to have to go through that 4 times in 7 games trying to hope that your guys handle themselves against left-handed pitching. For whatever reason in this world, lefties against lefties is a lot more difficult than a righty facing a righty.
Yeah, and I think when you evaluate what they're going to do at the deadline, I think there's 2 different ways it could go. Like, there's no question they're going to add an outfielder who can hit from the right side. Is it going to be a platoon piece that's right-handed plus the difference maker? Or is it going to just be the platoon piece? Or is it going to be the difference maker? And again, if you're watching this, you can see me doing air quotes. But, like, they have to decide how they want to do that, because I think in a perfect world, they go out and get a platoon piece and then they replace the center fielder altogether. You know, like, I think that's what it really ought to be. It should be Brandon Marsh and a guy that can hit lefties playing left field, and then a guy that can go out and be an everyday center fielder. You do those 2 things.
Almost 2 moves.
I mean, yeah, I think they're at the point. Like, this is a unique situation. You were in the World Series 2 years ago. You should have been in the World Series last year. You blew your opportunity. We said at the end of the NLCS last year, when are the Phillies ever going to have another opportunity as good as this one to win a championship? They blew it. Well, here they are a year later, and while it's not quite as good because they don't have a 3-2 lead with home field advantage against a team that only had 84 wins, they still have a heck of an opportunity to win a World Series this year. So you have to ask yourself the question, is this the year? And to me, I just don't think you can keep banking on it lining up like this. You got to do it now. You've got 3 weeks to go do it.
Yeah, and you wonder how much in the back of your mind do you say, well, as long as we have Turner and Harper and the way Boehm is going and with this pitching, that we're going to be in the mix. So do we have to make that franchise-altering type of decision? In the back of their minds, they have a 5 to 7 year window here, right?
Do they have a 5 to 7 year window? I don't think they do. I don't think they do. I think that they have
based on the ages.
I think they have 2 more cracks at winning a championship. Now, that's not to say that they're going to turn into a 74 win team and be an afterthought, but I think that the likelihood that in 2027 that they will be this well positioned as they are in 2024, I just don't buy that. I think that now is the time.
All right, 2 guys right now, Suarez and Sanchez. Suarez is going to the All-Star game. Sanchez could have been an All-Star. Thankfully, he's not making it. Suarez probably, but are you looking at those 2 guys as they're not matching what they did in the first half? And if they don't, what does that mean?
Yeah,
they're both, by the way, Sanchez needs 2 more innings to pass his entire total from last year.
Yeah, I think that that's a little bit of a concern. And Ranger Suarez at this point in the season has thrown more innings than he ever has before. And there's probably a fatigue element to this. I trust Ranger Suarez. Is he going to be the Cy Young Award winner? Probably not. I would imagine that there's enough regression there that he falls out of that mix. But when it's all said and done, I don't think that we're looking at a a situation where you say, wow, he was a Cy Young guy for 3 months and then turned into a fringe number 4 starter the remainder of the year. I think he's going through it right now. You make 32 starts, 33 starts in the course of a season. I think he's in a spot right now where he's struggling a little bit. Are we going to see what we saw those first few months again? Maybe not as consistently, but I still think you feel pretty good about him. I do think, however, they are going to have to monitor his workload. I think that they're going to have to monitor Christopher Sanchez's workload. I think it's very real. And when you look at the uncertainty in the 5 spot, this is like where you can make an argument. Like, do you go out and get a Michael Lorenzen guy who's making $4 million with the Rangers this year, who look like they're going to sell? And maybe not him specifically, but a player like that, a guy that can kind of swing back and forth, be a bullpen arm. You can plug him in the rotation, make some starts. Do they need a guy that can kind of take some relief and some of the workload off of these arms that have not treaded in these waters before? So is that something they might consider doing? May they go to a 6-man rotation despite Zach Wheeler's objections at some point? They might. That's probably something they need to think about.
Yep. And I think that back end of the bullpen has to still kind of be in the mix too, right? I mean, for all the reasons we're talking about, are Suarez and Sanchez going to have the same second half? Is Matt Strahm going to be as good as he was in the first half? What about Jeff Hoffman? I think we all like Hoffman and think that he has kind of kicked through to that next level of guy. But can you count on him to be the guy that shut the door in the 9th inning? He's never really been asked to do that on a World Series contending team.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's reasonable to expect Matt Strahm to be perfect for 3 months in the second half. But, he's kind of hit some bumps in the road here recently, and guys go through this. Like, I can't look at Matt Strahm's last 3 outings and say, red flags everywhere here. But, again, like, you saw Jose Alvarado on Friday night. He turned an 8-3 sleeper into a pretty interesting finish.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, here comes Jeff Hoffman into the game when you probably were hoping not to use it. Like, there are some concerns. Like, if in a perfect world, the Phillies would add another bullpen piece, they'd add another starter, they'd add probably, like I said, a platoon left fielder and a real center fielder. Like, you probably aren't going to do all these things. So you got to figure out, if we're going to make 3 moves, what are the 3 most impactful moves we can make?
Bob Wankel, RedOctoberPhilly.com, Crossing Broad. The Crossed Up podcast is out with Anthony. You can listen to even more Phillies conversation. Oh, boy. So did you end up getting to a game at Cardines Field?
I didn't. No, the wife vetoed that one, man.
Did you see the field?
I did. We drove right by it.
Very nice.
Pretty cool. Yeah, it's we were actually the second night, we were staying at the Marriott there, and it's right across the street, basically. So, you just walk across the street, you see it right there. So I did see it on the way out of town.
Very nice. Yeah. And did you get to White Horse Tavern?
No, I was gone by the time you sent me the link.
All right. Well,
yeah, we were out of there Saturday afternoon.
We said I'm not even here anymore.
Yeah. Well, I love it up there. I'll probably go back, maybe not next year, but probably 2 years out. So there'll be more opportunities.
Very good. Yeah, you got to get back there. Very good spot. All right, man. Well, tonight, the night off, Dodgers, A's, and then the All-Star break. Alec Boehm, home run derby, 7 Phillies in the game. Will Bryce Harper play in the game?
I think so. I would bet on that. Yeah. I think we'll see Bryce. I think we'll see Bryce before the All-Star game.
All right. Good stuff. All right, Bob Wankel, everybody. Good to see you, man.
All right, man. Talk soon.